So I wanted to share something which I believe God has been challenging me with in my life, and that is to have a hunger to love God better. I say this because I've noticed in my life it's very easy to take it easy in the Christian life. It's very easy for me to look at my life and say, well, I go to a nice church. My children participate in the Sunday school program. I join the midweek Bible studies and I help out at church every now and then. And I can think, hey, I'm doing pretty good as a Christian. But I feel like the question that God is trying to ask me is there a hunger to love God better? Is there a hunger to know God more? That is the important question that I want to ask myself and that I want to share about today. And so there was a story once in Matthew chapter 22 where someone asked Jesus a question, and this is in Matthew 22, verse 36. And someone asked Jesus, "Teacher, what is the great commandment? What is the most important commandment?" And Jesus responds with two things. And the first thing he says is, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind." And then the second thing he said was, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." And so if you look at those two commandments, they're actually quotations from the Old Testament. So the second one, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself," that's a quotation from the book of Leviticus. It was a part of a set of rules that God had given to Moses, and Moses wrote down in Leviticus. But if you look at where the first commandment, "You shall love the Lord with all your heart," where that came from, it didn't come from Leviticus. It actually came from the book of Deuteronomy. And the book of Deuteronomy was something that Moses had spoken to the Israelites. It was a series of speeches that Moses had given to the Israelites towards the very end of his life. So Moses led the Israelites for 40 years in the wilderness, and right before they were about to enter the promised land of Canaan, Moses reminded them of the things that God taught them, and that's what Deuteronomy was about. And so for me, the significance of that is when I look at this command, it wasn't something that God had just given in the book of Leviticus. I believe this command to love the Lord your God with all your heart was something that Moses learned through his experience of walking with the Lord for so many years. And that's the way I want to treat this. So imagine, here's Moses, a man of God whom God used to write scripture, fight battles, to do miracles, do all these wonderful things. And he gets to the end of his life. What is the lesson that Moses has learned? I believe one of the lessons he learned was that the most important thing is to love the Lord your God with all your heart. And so for me, the takeaway is that if I want to be wise and I want to learn from those who have gone ahead of me, then I should learn this lesson now, that the most important thing is not the service that I do, but it's loving the Lord with all my heart. That is most important. Now, sometimes when I hear, "You shall love the Lord with all your heart," does it sound like a burden sometimes? Does it sound like a huge command? And I can see how I myself have seen that sometimes, but I think it's really a matter of perspective. And so I'll share another story. This is from the book of Luke, in chapter 14. And in this story, around Luke chapter 14 and verse 25, a large crowd is following Jesus. And then Jesus turns around and starts telling them the conditions of discipleship. And this is Luke chapter 14, verse 25 and 26. And the first thing that Jesus says to them is, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father, mother, and wife and children, and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple." In other words, what Jesus is saying is that if you want to follow me, the first thing you must do is to love me more than anyone else in the world. Like we heard in church, the difference between the sun and the stars, our love for Jesus must be like the sun. And so when I think of it that way, I think of it as a very pure type of love, that what the Lord really wants from us, first and foremost, is our hearts and not so much our service per se. And let me share an example. Let's say there's a young girl, and she wants to get married. And there's two men that's proposing to her. And so the first man goes to this girl and he says, "I would like you to marry me. I love you. And what I require of you is that you love me, but you also must clean the house every day. You also must earn a lot of money at your job. And you also must cook meals for me every day. And then I will marry you." Okay, so that's guy number one. Guy number two goes to the same girl and says, "I want you to marry me. And the only thing I want you to do is I want you to love me more than anyone else in the world. You should have zero love for any other man on the face of this earth. You must only love me. So of those two men, which do you think the girl would choose to marry? And if I were that girl, I'd say I definitely pick the second man. Why? Because there's a very pure love that's there. The second man just wants this girl for her heart, whereas the other one wants the girl for her heart and a bunch of service. And so when I think of my relationship with God and what Jesus says here, what I'm reminded of is that the primary thing that Jesus wants for me is my love. Yes, we evangelize. Yes, we do things in ministry, but that's all secondary. The first and most important thing is that Jesus wants our hearts. So when I see this command to love Jesus, it's not a burden, but it's really meant to show how pure God's love for us and that he wants us for our hearts primarily. And so what exactly is a disciple of Jesus? If I look at that verse, here's how I paraphrase it. I believe a disciple of Jesus is a lover of God. That's what a disciple is. A disciple is a lover of God. And I hope that when God looks at my life, I hope that's the way he'll remember me, as a lover of God, not as someone who does different things, but primarily as a lover of God. I want to play a small game. Let's say, for example, you could pick a new name for yourself. Okay, so we all know that our names are very important. Like our names carry meaning and significance. So if you could pick another name today, okay, and it's related to that question, how does God want to remind you? What name from the Bible would you pick? Okay, if you could pick another name for yourself today, which name from the Bible would you pick for yourself? Because that's going to represent how God wants to remember you. So for example, if you want to be remembered by God as someone who is very brave, maybe you'll pick, hey, I want to be a David, or I want to be a Daniel. Or maybe you say, I want to be remembered as someone who's very wise. Then maybe you say, hey, I want to pick the name Solomon. Okay, and so if you were to ask me that question, which name would you pick? I'll tell you the name I would pick. And it's the name Theophilus. Okay, Theophilus. This is the person whom Luke wrote the letter of Luke to. And this is in Luke chapter 1, verse 3. You can see the name Theophilus. And the word Theophilus means lover of God. So if I could pick one name, that's the name I would pick, because I like that meaning. It means lover of God. Because when God looks back at my life, I don't want him to think of me as someone who did a lot of things and was active in church. That's not important to me. The most important thing I really hope God remembers is that when I lived on this earth and he loved me, and that would mean the world to me. And I hope that when Jesus comes back and he looks at our church, for example, he'll see beyond just the nice programs and nice Sunday schools, which are wonderful, but beyond that, he'll see a church full of people who have a heart to really love God more and more. And that's really what I hope this church will become like more and more. And so the last thing I just want to share is an encouragement. So how do we get there? I think there's many practical things we can do for loving God, obeying his commandments, spending time with him, etc. But in the interest of time, I just want to share a quick promise to loving God more. And this is, I still think, one of the best, if not the best promise that the Lord's given us. This is from Deuteronomy chapter 30 and verse 6. Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 6. I think the best promise that God's given us. It's from a memory verse. I'll read it. Deuteronomy 30, verse 6. The Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your descendants to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, so that you may live. What I like about this memory verse here is that the context for which it comes. The context, Moses is saying to Israelites that one day, if you keep falling away from the Lord and sinning, you're going to go into captivity. That while you're in captivity, if you turn back to the Lord, this is what the Lord's going to do for you. So in other words, Moses is saying is when you hit rock bottom, when you're at the absolute worst, when you've sinned against God so much that you're even banished to captivity, but there you turn around and decide, I want to follow the Lord, then this very, very best promise that God has for us, that he'll circumcise our hearts, and not just our hearts, but the hearts of our entire families, my wife, my 3 children, they're going to circumcise every single one. And so I think it's a wonderful promise, and I love the context, because no matter where we are, even if we're at rock bottom, this is a promise we can claim that God can do for us. So that's something that God has been challenging me with recently, and I believe he'll help me to take steps to walk towards that. Thank you.
So, hi family. I want to share also from the memory verse. Memory verse is Matthew 23, verse 26. Matthew 23, 26. First, clean the inside of the cup and of the dish so that the outside of it may become clean also. So recently, after my sharings, I asked one of the brothers how I can be better or improve in my sharings, because he always looks so calm and relaxed and smiling up here. And one time he told me, you should smile a little bit more. I said, okay, I'm going to work on that. It's a good suggestion. And the next time I asked him, then the second time he told me, you should not have worn a red shirt or red sweater, because he said I blended in with the curtain back here. So the last thing I had on my mind was the red curtain in the back. And I asked him because he's always brutally honest, and I love his suggestions. I really appreciate. But what the Lord reminded me from this verse was, I can look, and you can see I'm wearing a blue shirt today. So the Lord reminded me was that I can look really nice, good, with a good smile, but if my heart is not clean, then it does not matter. It's useless what I share up here, or not just regarding what I share, but my life, my at home, how I deal with my wife, my children. If my heart is not clean and what comes out is not pure, then it's useless. So everything that's clean in a cup or a dish we know it's clean. So if my heart is clean and pure, automatically good things will come out. Pure heart means love, joy, peace, kindness. So the Lord tells the Pharisees in Luke 11:39, but now you Pharisees clean the outside of the cup and of the dish, but your inside is full of greed and wickedness. So I also can be a Pharisee if my heart is not clean. I can have unclean stuff inside. And the Lord tells the Pharisees earlier in the verse 4, that they tie up heavy burdens on other people and they don't do it themselves. So this is one area that the Lord also reminded me from, is the area where I expect or tell my others to do it, like my wife or my children, but I don't do it myself. An area is raising my voice at home with my wife or my children. I tell them not to do it, but I myself don't do it. So the Lord reminded me that this is an area where I need to watch my heart. So the encouragement the Lord gave me is that the cleaning of the cup is not a one-time process. There's always will be dirty cups. My sink can be filled with dirty cups or dishes all the time. Similarly, my heart can be dirty and filthy, but it's a repetitive process. I must keep on cleaning and the heart. So I should do my part to guard from getting it filthy, and the Lord will do His part to help me. So the verse I want to share is from Proverbs 4:23. Watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flows the springs of life. So I gotta do my part in watching over my heart diligently, and the Lord will do His part. Is in Ezekiel 26. Ezekiel 36:26. Moreover, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you, and I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. So this is His promise. And also in verse 29, it says, I will save you from all your uncleanness. So the Lord will do that for me. So I just have to do my part. And my prayer is from the song Refiner's Fire. Purify my heart, cleanse me from within, and make me holy. Purify my heart, cleanse me from my sin deep within. So that's my prayer, and may God help me, and may God help all of us.